first of all, thank you very much for joining me today on Culture Corner. It's really good for you to take the time out to join me and give your pearls of wisdom around culture and high performing teams. I have to say it's a first for me having a best-selling author on the podcast, so that I'll take that. It's a bit of a novelty. We'll give you your bug a plug as well when you give a bit of an overview about yourself. But obviously we've met a couple of times. If you can anyone who's listening that doesn't know, if you just give a bit of an overview of yourself, your background, your experience, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here. So I'm a business leader, trainer, and coach, and my mantra is I inspire everyone around me to achieve more than they think they can. That's what I'm all about. That's my why. That's my purpose. And I'm very lucky because I spend my days doing that in my business, Team Sturka. I'm the founder and head coach there. And we're a training and coaching business that creates high-performing teams. So I spend my days running programs with our clients around emotional intelligence and people skills. And as you say, very kindly, you mentioned the book. I wrote a book about all the skills that we teach, really. It's called Human Powered. And the book is all about helping you to gain those people skills and the emotional intelligence in particular that you need to succeed in the modern world. So, 20 years ago and before, the working world was very siloed. You kind of just put your head down and got on with it. And now we work in a world of collaboration and matrix structures where we need to work really closely with our colleagues. And where once we worked independently, now we tend to work interdependently. And skills around being really amazing at your job are still important as before. But what we've realized is that the power of the team is so much greater than just a group of disparate, highly skilled individuals. So skills around working well with other people, communication, emotional intelligence are more important than they've ever been before in the world of work. And this is what really prompted me to write the book. So the book Human Powered came out a couple of years ago. It's done all right. Actually, it was a bestseller a couple of weeks later, and I think there's around 5,000 copies out there now across print, audiobook, and Kindle.
Very good, very good. Good return on the investment.
Fantastic. Well, yes and no, because the amount of time that it takes to write a book and then do the marketing for it, because you can write the best book in the world, but no one will buy it if the marketing's not there. And the publisher helps a bit with the marketing, but really it's your own network that needs doing. So I think I probably, if you look at how much I've made from it and the amount of time I put in, I suspect I've maybe made the minimum wage off of it, right. If I'm lucky.
Right, not retirement scenario then, Trenton.
No. My sales figures for the book are slightly short of J.K. Rowling.
Oh, okay, fair enough. That's a big bar to aim for, though, isn't it? To be fair, big bar. But yeah, your background absolutely spot on for what we're looking for on the podcast around the culture and high performing. So you've got a lot of experience in that area. So how would you describe a great culture? What makes a great culture?
Yeah, sure. So I can kind of give my answer to this about a great culture based on, obviously what I see with clients and also my own experience. So most of my career before running the business I now run, I spent 15 years of my career running my own consultancy, and I ran that for 15 years, and eventually we were acquired, and I exited. And so one of the things that I did within the business was I followed Dan Pink's Autonomy, Mastery, and Purpose quite a lot. So about 10 years ago, Dan Pink wrote a book, and he had these principles of that, and that's how you make a great culture. And I really bought into that. So autonomy is making sure that people have independence and trust so they can crack on with their job without being micromanaged. Mastery means that you've got the time and the space and the permission to learn and to become a master of whatever it is that you're most interested in, ideally aligned with the business goals. So autonomy, mastery, and finally, purpose. People, and this one's more well known, really, people need to understand, well, why am I doing this? What's the why of this business, and why do I come to work every day? And how does what I'm doing every day tie into, the greater purpose of this business?
Yeah. That's definitely something that's cropped up quite a bit. yeah, I've done a lot of reading around, I suppose, the Amy Edmondson stuff and the
Hmm.
Simon Sinek and the why. It was interesting you mentioned your why before, but the why do people do specific things and the purpose that, why would you join an organisation? What's the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? And a lot of people are looking for that to align nowadays, aren't they?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's incredibly important, and the why of returning a good investment to our shareholders isn't particularly motivating for the vast majority of people. So, a lot of people nowadays, a lot of businesses talk about profit, people, planet. And that's a really nice way of looking at it, because it's like, okay, profit is important. And it is. Make no mistake, if you're running a business, profit is important. And a lot of people within a business kind of associate profit as being, I guess, kind of a dirty word, because you associate it with fat cats getting even more fat. If you're not making a profit, you're at risk of losing your job. And if the business continues to not make a profit, you're at risk of everybody losing their job. So, whilst we need to have a purpose, and the purpose needs to be something that inspires us, you cannot forget the importance of profit. And businesses need to work hard to make sure that people get that profit isn't a dirty word, that it is still something that's really important. And businesses need to share really strongly with everyone who works there about why profit is so important. And with this profit that we've made this year, here's what we're doing with the money. So there's full transparency around it. So profit isn't just, oh, well, that's just for the leaders or the shareholders or the owners to just get even richer.
Do you think it's interesting you mentioned that? I agree with the transparency and the communication. And do you think it's important to share as much as possible with the employees, with the workforce? I know probably communication is something that's people tend to sit on information, don't they? I've seen the umbrella analogy where my job as a manager is to shield my team from all the info, from all the negativity or the other things that are going on. And quite a lot of people are saying actually, some of that needs to seep through so the employees do understand, what's happening.
It all needs to seep through. Transparency is incredibly important. Well, okay, let me say that again. It all needs to seep through, provided that your leadership are exemplars of the culture that you're trying to create. So some of the time, the behavior of leadership can be the exact opposite of the culture. And they're not working as a high performing team. They're not creating psychological safety for each other. And if that's the case, then yeah, you do want an umbrella in place. You want to shield people from that. Now, if the leadership are exemplars of your ideal culture, then you don't want to shield anything, because openness and transparency creates trust. So as a business, you should be sharing as a leadership, you should be sharing with the rest of the business about what's going on, what your 3-year plan is, and then how that tracks back to your plan for the next year, to the plan for this quarter, to the plan for this month, and then how that applies to your job as an individual in the business within this department, and so on. You should be being transparent around that. You should be being transparent around the financials. You don't necessarily need to do it every week or every month. It's about what's appropriate for your business. It may be monthly, it may be quarterly, it may even be 6 monthly. It's about what feels right for the business. And if you are doing well as a business and creating profit, like I said, you should then explain what happens to that profit and the importance of making the profit. And yes, we have this purpose, and the purpose of why we're here is still there. But by having this profit, that helps us to get closer to this purpose for reasons A, B, and C. And if you're going through a difficult time, then again, you be transparent. Because here's the thing. Everyone knows if the financial performance isn't great.
Yeah.
You can see it. You see what's going on in the business. And if you don't address it with honesty and upfrontness, then you're leaving people's conclusions to be their imagination. And I can tell you now, their imagination will always be worse than whatever the reality is. So you talk about the reality and you explain the difficult circumstances you're under, and you be transparent. Right? Look, if there are going to be potential redundancies, you explain what needs to happen for that not to happen, or for potentially it to happen. And then if it does happen, everyone really appreciates the fact that they had the heads up and that they knew this was going to happen. So that transparency and that and the opposite, I guess, holding the umbrella up to shield people from stuff that happens. That's quite an old-fashioned way of working, I would suggest, and isn't the hallmark or a characteristic of an organization that's high performing.
Yeah, I like a couple of things you said there. If you don't communicate with people, your mind just goes into overdrive, doesn't it? And you'll start dreaming up things that aren't necessarily correct, and
all the time
you'll believe that that's correct and run with it. And there's something else that you mentioned there that I found quite interesting, is linking the end result, linking the individual's part into the end result. So how your role goes towards what the business is trying to achieve at the end, and what part you play in it to give them that vision and purpose for the.
Yeah, it's one of the most important things you can do if you want a high performing individual and high performing teams and high performing organizations. So you need to align everyone around a common vision, around a common purpose, around a common set of behaviors and values and culture and so on and so on. Because if you don't, they'll create their own versions of all of those. And you may not like their own versions. So it all starts from that vision. Where do we want to get to within the next 2 to 3 years based on our purpose, our reason for being here. And once you've got that, to be honest, it's kind of straightforward to work backwards from there. And then just apply that eventually down to every person in your business around why their role is helping you to achieve that vision. It's actually kind of straightforward. You just have to kind of track back and then work it out. And then if you really can't work it out, it could be that either A, why are they doing that job? Like, why does that function exist in the business? Or B, if it is existing, then it may just be that it's very profitable. And that could be part of the reason for it, because by making this money here, it means we can we can invest over here to help with our purpose. So all of that needs to come down to into people. But it's not just the vision and the purpose. It's also around the specific, values and behaviors that you expect from them. Because you could define a set of rules, right? But that just feels a bit top down, kind of like, like, what are we at school here? And rather than rules, you come up with a set of values and expected behaviors, for example, and those are your guiding principles. So you're creating boundaries for how you expect people to behave, and if they don't behave that way, then obviously you can talk to them about it and you can explain to them. You can find, obviously go in inquisitively, what's going on here, and make sure they understand that behavior isn't in line with our values, and therefore, what do we need to do about it? And by having those in place, and by making sure your values obviously line up with your vision and your purpose and how you want your culture to be, you've then got a framework. You've got a kind of like, I'm going to need to think of this word. Hold on. You'll need to edit this. Sorry. Right. What's the word where it's boundaries? Okay. Okay. Yeah. You need to, okay. So you've got a kind of framework. You've got boundaries for people to operate within. And that's super important. Everybody needs boundaries so we understand what is and isn't acceptable. Now, we don't want to be micromanaged, and we need freedom to be the best versions of ourselves and to thrive in our roles, but it needs to be done in the context of boundaries. And those values and perhaps behaviors, if you want to define those as well, those explain what those boundaries are.
Okay. That makes sense. Then everybody knows where they are, don't they? It's a clear playing field, and they know their levels of expectations. With regards to that, you're saying, would you then hire in line with the specific company specific values and behaviours? Would you roll those into competency-based interviewing? I know some people are worried about hiring in line with specific behaviours because it would generate multiple Adrians, but I don't know whether that is a bit of a rigid.
It's a great question, Adrian. That's a really good question, because often when it comes to things like values and behaviors, if you feel you're an exemplar of that, you look for people who are doing it exactly the same as you. And it's actually very easy for someone to do things in line with the values, but in quite a different way. So it's very important that as an organization, you define what your values and behaviors, but you need to go into more detail than that. And you need to kind of really list out what are like specific instances of this. What does that look like in reality? So that you're all very much aware of how to recognize that value, for example. So when you go into an interview, and your recruitment process, you absolutely you want to be recruiting around cultural fit, because that's, people can learn that. I've seen it time and time again that people skills and emotional intelligence can be taught. But hey, if you can just recruit someone who's really good at that from the off and in line with your culture, obviously that's better than having to go through a process with them. So you absolutely want to be recruiting in line with your culture. And you just need to make sure that you're not recruiting, if your name's Adrian, you're not recruiting someone who's just like another Adrian, another version of you, but you're recruiting someone who is sticking to those values and behaviors. And obviously in the sort of questions that you ask, and looking for specific examples from them of when they've said and done those things. But then the other thing is, once they join, all of that, those expected values and behaviors and so on, and your cultural frameworks, that all goes into competency frameworks. So, pathways to promotion, it's not just about the skills, the hard skills, the practitioner skills. It's also about the stuff about how you're contributing to us being the culture that we want to be.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Because someone mentioned to me that the different wording a few months ago, culture rather than cultural fit, cultural add. So you sort of adding to the culture rather than looking for a fit, because a fit might create a more Adrians. You create that bit of bias, but I don't know whether that's going into it in too much.
No, it's a really nice analogy about adding to the culture rather than just fitting in and being able to be yourself, which, if there's psychological safety within the business, then that should happen. And again, look, like I've talked about boundaries. Boundaries are not like, a small circle where it's really fixed and you're being micromanaged and told to behave this specific way, just like Adrian. Boundaries are much looser set of guidelines, and they're kind of based on outcomes, on like what happens as a result of your behavior and your communications. So you choose how to behave and how to communicate, and provided it's in line with the culture and the expectations around how you're going to be with other people, then it's all good.
Perfect. You mentioned something there that we'll dive into, psychological safety. So how important is, we know how important creating belonging is within a team, and the trust aspect. But how would you go about? What are ways of doing that? So a new person comes on into the team. How do you ensure that they have that feeling of belonging, and they can gain that trust of the other members of the team, or the leader, if you like?
Yeah. I mean, it's really, as you mentioned, the psychological safety is key here. So psychological safety is, the idea that you can take risks, you can express concerns, you can share your ideas, you can ask questions, you can admit mistakes, and you can do all of that without the fear of negative repercussions happening to you. So, Google did a really famous study. I mean, it's almost 10 years old now, this study, but they spent 2 years researching their teams. They really wanted to understand what makes the perfect team, the most high performing teams. And their theory actually at the start was, well, it's going to be one Rhodes Scholar, 2 extroverts, an engineer who rocks at Angular, and a PhD. And that was like literally what they kind of scribbled down, as it's going to be something like this. And after literally 2 years, they could only find one thing in common with their highest performing teams, and the opposite with the lowest performing teams, and that was psychological safety. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. The sum of the parts with a team that's high performing is so much more than just the individuals. So would you rather a group of isolated toxic rock stars, or a team of good individuals who are high performing? And I can tell you now that team of good individuals who are high performing in the long term will always outperform the group of individual toxic rock stars. So if you've got someone joining a business and you want to create that sense of belonging and that psychological safety, I mean, again, it comes down to your culture and the training that you give to leadership and people in the business, and around how strongly you enforce those expectations of them. And in smaller businesses, this is easier. And in larger businesses, this can be harder. Ultimately, everything stems from the top, right? So whatever values and culture you have, it's got to be an extension of your leadership, the main person, the leadership's almost their personality and their way of being. And that's got to then percolate into the rest of the leadership team, which then percolates down into departments, which then percolates down into managers, which then percolates down into teams, or however large the business is. So it absolutely has to come from the top. And the person at the top has to live and breathe this stuff and be an exemplar, on it like 100% of the time, an absolute exemplar of your ideal culture, and including psychological safety. And if that person is, then the chances of everyone in their leadership team doing that are greatly increased, and so on and so on. The other thing you then have to do as the leader, and all the other leaders and everyone and all the way through the organization, is you cannot let other people get away with behavior that is against your culture and against your values, and that restricts psychological safety. Anytime you see that, you've got to stamp it out straight away. You go and talk to the individual involved, and in a constructive way. Obviously, it's not blaming, it's asking questions, it's finding out what's going on, it's reminding about expectations for what the behavior should be, and then it's coming up with a win-win solution and looking at a way forward. So you need people to be doing this, and you need to make it so obvious to everyone else that when someone steps out of line, action is immediately taken. And as soon as someone sees that once, they're like, okay, I need to be this way. And they take this very seriously. And then if that person continually goes against your culture, ultimately, they've got to leave the business. Because no one person is, no matter how good they are, no matter how if it's a consultancy, if they're delivering, if they're in charge of 50% of your clients, and how are we going to survive without them? You will survive better without them, because ultimately your culture will go downhill as a result of them. Other good people will leave because they don't like that person's behavior, and it starts to spread like a virus in the business. One bad apple does spoil the whole bunch. So you take immediate action to remedy the situation, whatever that might look like, whilst maintaining psychological safety for that individual. That's how you retain that culture.
I think you're right there. You hear the phrase about your culture is the worst trait that you're willing to accept, and that kind of thing. And there's plenty of businesses out there, I suppose, especially in sales environments. We've seen it in a sales environment where a business will have a rock star. They're bringing in that revenue, but if you get it wrong and allow that rock star just to do whatever they want, just because people hang on, we need him, we need her, we need him for the revenue, and it just imbalances the business, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? And I've learned this over the years. No one's bigger than the business. You're always fine. When your rock star leaves for whatever reason, whether they're toxic rock star or someone in line with your culture, if they leave, you're always fine.
Definitely. And thinking about psychological safety for high performing teams, it's important to have that, isn't it? Because you really want people to be feeding back to you. Okay, Trenton, this is what I think. These are my views. This is how you want people to innovate. You want people's opinions on how to move forward, and that kind of thing. You want people to be comfortable enough to share their thoughts and voice their opinions. And I suppose as a manager, you've also got to think about the way that you react to those to people voicing their opinion as well, because it might not always be positive. They might want to challenge, and they might want to change things.
Yeah, 100%. And you need to encourage that. Like conflict is often thought of as a negative word. Conflict is unbelievably important. It is so important that you disagree with someone and that they have a different perspective to you. And by not agreeing with people that are in your team or that you work with, you end up coming to better outcomes than if just, there's a bunch of Adrians there, right? You need that diversity of thought, that diversity of opinion, and you work together to then come up with what you believe to be the best possible outcome. And sometimes, you can achieve that. You can come up with a win-win that supports what everyone thinks. And other times you don't. And that's fine. That's life. And you never know for sure who's right? Like, even though you've done this for 20 years and this is what works, you might not be correct. It is just your opinion. Yeah. And if everyone, again, has the tools to deal with conflict in a constructive way, then everything's fine. And if everyone is always focused on a win-win outcome, so there's a great model called the Thomas Kilmann conflict model. So originally I used to think it was a guy called Thomas Kilmann, but actually it's two people, a Mr. Thomas and a Mr. Kilmann. And they came up with this model around conflict resolution. And there's a nice little graph around it. And they're basically saying, you've got to go for win-win, right? Because if you go for win-lose, one of two things, if it's win-lose, one of two things might happen, right? You might be too accommodating. You might just kind of bend over. You might be a yes person, in which case the other person always gets their way, and that's win-lose, right? They get a good outcome and you don't, and you don't feel happy. And that continually happens, then your confidence goes down, your morale goes down, and ultimately you're going to be low performing and you'll probably leave. On the flip side, you don't want a win-lose where it's, what the Thomas Kilmann model says is around competing, which is where you win and they lose. So you drive your opinion through, you get the outcome you want, but they don't buy into it. So maybe you win the battle, but you lose the war because no one buys into it. So where you really want to get to, according to the Thomas Kilmann model, is around collaboration. And collaboration is around win-win. So you go into every conversation and you say, right, this is the outcome I want, and this is the outcome you want. It might not be that quick. You might need to discuss this and agree on the outcomes that you both want. But you're right. Here's my outcome, my target outcome. Here's your target outcome. Now, I want you to know I am determined to get the outcome that I want. I am going to fight to get the outcome that I want. I am also going to fight equally hard. It's a 50-50 split. I'm going to fight equally hard for you to get the outcome you want. I am determined for both of us to win in this conversation. And that is an unbelievably powerful message to give to someone.
Yeah, it probably breaks down the tension from the start, doesn't it? I've never come across that before. That's a new one for me, but I understand that it breaks down the loggerheads, I suppose, and then you try and work through it together.
You work together, because then the other person's like, great, they're not going to try and screw me over. They respect me. And I also can't screw them over. Not that they were necessarily thinking that, but I'd better do the same. I'd better take a stand for both. You're leading by example, doing something that clearly, objectively, is a good thing to do. So there's a good chance everyone else in the room is going to follow suit and try and make sure that everyone gets a good outcome. And look, in a world of unlimited budgets and unlimited time, you can always get a win-win outcome. I mean, the reality is we don't have that, right? So sometimes you have to track back a bit and you're going to need to compromise. But your objective in every discussion, no matter how unlikely it looks like that you might achieve this, your objective, and you tell everyone this is your objective, is I want a win-win outcome. I'm going to fight for it. I'm going to fight for this outcome, and I'm going to fight equally strongly for both.
That's really good. That is a great tip, because I've been in plenty of conversations where it's just one individual driving for their ended result, and it's very difficult then because the other person has their backup straight away, don't they? And there's a lot of resistance. So that is great. Thank you for sharing that. I know we touched on it a bit earlier, but on the diversity, why is diversity so important in high performing teams?
Yeah, well, again, it's that diversity is just, for me, it's just diversity of thought, diversity of approaching how we do things. So again, if you've got, to keep going with this, a bunch of Adrians together, that would be great. Very Adrian centric, but your ideas, your problem solving, the path you choose to move forward is going to be so limited by your narrow vision of just, how all of you guys think. And what you ideally want is people who think in very different ways. So there are 4 different personality types and 4 different ways of communicating. And you want to get a really good mix of those 4 different personality types so that you've got different priorities. So within the 4 different types, you've got some people who are very driven by relationships, and it's kind of personal relationships that bring them energy, which is great, because in any decisions that get made, they're always going to be thinking about the other stakeholders and making sure people are on board. You've got other people who are very driven by big picture ideas and recognition. So that's great, because they're going to think of the big ideas, the world changing things. You got other people who are very driven by achievement and getting things done. So they're great because, well, obviously they're going to help drive things forward, make things happen. And then you got other people who are very motivated and energized by crafting things. and perfecting things. And that's great because that's the people who are going to go into the detail. So you want to mix it. Those are the 4 different personality types, and you want a mix of all of those because clearly, as I've said, all of those things are important. And if you get a bunch of people who are all just your dreamers, your big picture thinkers, that's great. You're going to have loads of great ideas and loads of terrible ideas, but nothing's going to get done. And all you're going to be doing is pointing towards the long term and not thinking about the short term. So you need that real mix, that diversity of thought, of communications, of priorities, of what motivates you, because that creates that healthy tension. And as long as you all know how to deal with conflict and you've got frameworks in place to make sure that when you disagree with someone or communicate in a different way to them, you've got ways of dealing with that that lead to positive outcomes, well, then you're very likely going to get to a place of high performance.
Perfect. And I suppose to flip onto something else I wanted to ask you about is creating that environment is obviously down to the leader. You don't want a leader who's saying, I've got all the answers. They're the only voice in the room. You want a leader who's encourages people to speak up and is happy to be challenged and creates that safe environment. So I was going to lead on to that, the importance of a good leader, and really ask you, with your experience, what makes a good leader?
Yeah, I mean, let me tell you what doesn't make a good leader, right? So, the kind of more old-fashioned, command and control, like you said, the leader has all the answers. That's absolutely not what makes a good leader. But also the things that when we look at leaders and we look at their behavior, we often think, oh God, I could never behave that way, but you don't need to. So as a leader, you don't need to be really confident. You can have imposter syndrome. You also don't need to be the loudest person in the room. None of that matters. A good leader is one who has oodles and oodles of self-awareness and then leads in a way that makes the most sense to them. So again, depending on the things that motivate you, depending on your values, depending on your core strengths, you should uncover what all these are. You should do certain activities to help you learn these things and build up that self-awareness. And then you lead in the style that makes the most sense to you. And as long as what you do gets all the people around you to perform to the best of their abilities whilst driving to a shared goal, it doesn't matter what you do. So let me just say that again. So leadership, it's about getting everyone around you to perform to the best of their abilities whilst driving towards that shared goal. So, all the things we're talking about around, being open, psychological safety, seeking win-win outcomes. I mean, you need to do all of those to get everyone performing to the best of their abilities. You need to define a vision so there's a shared goal. So all the things we're talking about, have to happen to make sure that you get everyone performing to the best of their abilities whilst driving towards that shared goal. But it doesn't matter what you do around that as long as that's happening.
Perfect. And I wanted to go on, that probably goes nicely into, it was a focus of your book, but emotional intelligence. I'd be keen to talk about that for a bit. The importance of emotional intelligence, the benefits of it on obviously cultures and high performing teams. So I know you'll have plenty to say on this.
I do. I could write a book about this. So, yeah, I mean, there's been loads of studies around things like emotional intelligence. There's a good one I like. That was a joint study by Stanford and Harvard universities, and they found that 85% of job success comes from well-developed people skills. Your emotional intelligence, your ability to work well with other people. 85%. We did some research and we found that 70% of team issues are caused by people skills deficiencies. There's been a bunch of studies around, the Glassdoor best places to work. The companies listed there, they have outperformed the rest of the stock market for many, many years. And companies that have high employment engagement, they've been shown to achieve higher profit and higher productivity than those without. So the benefits, the business benefits of emotional intelligence are there to be seen.
Perfect. And it is, I think it's, I suppose, emotional awareness, being aware of yourself as well, isn't it?
Well, that is a core part. So emotional intelligence is really two things. It's that it's empathy and understanding other people and what's motivating them, what's driving them, and ultimately those emotions, and assuming the best of intentions, because it's we're so quick to blame people when things go wrong. And like, no one sets out to annoy, anger, or frustrate you. That's just not a thing. They often do anger, annoy, and frustrate you, but it's not their intentions. So if you've got good empathy skills, which is a core part of emotional intelligence, then you're going to get that, and you're going to like work out what their intentions are. But that's only half the battle. Half the battle of emotional intelligence is understanding other people, and the other half is, as you say, it's about that self-awareness, and it's about knowing what your strengths are, what your values are, what's important to you, your communication style. And it's also about knowing, what are the things that I do and say that has a negative impact on other people? And what are the things that I do and say that have a positive impact on other people and that they value in me? And it's about continually trying to understand all these things and learn more about yourself, because then you can do more of the things that people like and that motivate them and that help them to be even more high performing. And obviously you can do less of those things that annoy, frustrate, and anger them, because you also don't mean to annoy, frustrate, or anger people, but you do.
Definitely. It's being aware of yourself, isn't it? And looking at yourself and how you can, how you can develop. And I suppose it goes a little bit back to just touched on the feedback bit, didn't it? Before, if somebody's providing you with feedback, it's how you react to that, understanding yourself, managing your emotions, how you react in that particular situation.
Yeah, and it can be hard to hear negative feedback about yourself, because, oh God, especially if it's really cutting, it can be difficult. And again, you have to work through that. You talk about it with people, like the 5 stages of grief. Okay, everyone hates me. I need to grieve the loss of being liked. So you go through that through to acceptance. And then you have to say, well, what will I do about this? Because I can't change people's opinions and I can't change people's behavior, but I can change my opinions and I can change my behavior. And, Gandhi allegedly said, although there's no evidence that he said this, but Gandhi is popularly attributed as saying that, be the change that you want to see in the world. So you need to be that exemplar of who you'd like to be. So you get feedback. You're like, right, what should I do about this? And you talk to a few trusted people around you who you work closely with, who you have psychological safety with, and you get them their help and their advice and their thoughts on the changes you need to make to get to that end outcome. But it's about being open to this, because if you expect that you can give other people constructive criticism and you want them to change, which you should if you're a leader, obviously, it's unkind not to, because you need to help people to grow and develop as your job. Well, then when it happens to you, put your big boy pants on, and take it and listen to it and accept it and work out a way forward. And you could just say, well, it's not working here, I need to get out of here, but then you're running away from your problems. And you know what happens when you quit your job, get a new job, and run away from those problems? It's remarkable. It only takes a few months. They come back, they come and find you again wherever you go. There's no hiding. So it's far better to kind of take them on, to be grown up about it, to be brave, and you have to be very brave, and to show vulnerability to your team. And you can say to your team, like, if you do get feedback about how you are, you can talk to them and say, okay, this is what I'm doing, and I hear you. I hear that it's having a negative impact on you. There's something I teach in my programs, which is called See It, Say It, Stop It. And that's about, trying to uncover the negative impact you have on other people, because you will do. You don't mean to, and you don't necessarily do it frequently, but you will negatively impact other people more than what you think. And it's always more than what you think, because you never think you are. So what you do is you find out the things you do to negatively impact other people, and then you go into meetings, say, and you'll start noticing that behavior. You will see it simply because it's been made aware to you. So maybe your negative behaviors, I don't know, you interrupt people, right? So you're in a meeting and you find yourself interrupting someone. You're like, oh gosh, and you notice it in a way you maybe didn't before. So that's see it. So see it, say it, stop it. So you see it, and then you need to move to say it, which is the hardest part. And that's when you say, let's say I've just interrupted you, Adrian, and I say, Adrian, do you know what? Sorry, I just interrupted you. I know I do this quite a lot, and it's something I'm trying not to do. Let me stop talking. You speak. And apologies again for interrupting you. And what's really amazing is see it, say it, and the next thing is stop it. What's really amazing is you won't do it again in that meeting. Once you acknowledge it in the room, I can guarantee you you will not interrupt anyone again in that meeting. And you do this a few times and it becomes learnt behavior. And here's the funny thing. A lot of people can feel awkward saying this. Oh God, what are people going to think of me? But here's the thing. Everyone knows you're doing it. Everyone can see you doing it. So all you're doing is acknowledging the elephant in the room, and the amount of respect they'll have for you for acknowledging it, for showing that vulnerability, and for creating that psychological safety, because you're basically saying to everyone in the room, it's okay to admit a weakness.
Yeah, that's huge, isn't it? That is huge. Once people see that, you're almost starting the vulnerability piece by saying, these are my flaws. You're airing your flaws, and then that brings down barriers, doesn't it? Raises the trust.
100%. 100%. And it's your people follow your behavior. They will do what you do, not what you say. So if you say to everyone, yeah, it's fine to show weaknesses. I want psychological safety. Let's all show our vulnerabilities. And you don't show any, and you're always trying to be perfect. Well, what do you think they're going to do?
Yeah, they're not going to speak up, are they? They're not going to speak up at all. And you've got to be willing as a leader to accept that, to develop, haven't you? Accept the criticism, accept the feedback, and move on, basically.
But if everyone, and I really believe this, like looking bigger picture, if everyone can be like this, if everyone can score highly in emotional intelligence and be open and, really work hard to create that psychological safety, we'll have no more stakeholder politics. We'll have no more petty disputes. We'll have no more grievances. I really believe this. Like, I really buy into this stuff. And I honestly think there's such a better way of us all working together, and it'll increase everyone's well-being. It'll increase everyone's individual and team performance, and it will increase the business performance. And we all know what we need to do. We just need to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And creating that type of environment, it removes the fear, doesn't it? I think it's a fear that restricts people from bringing your whole self to work or speaking up in meetings. So you're taking that fear away, and it allows them to develop. And it's good for the business and good for the individual. So that's great.
It's like win-win-win.
One more thing to wanted to touch on, because I know I've been bending your ear for a long time now. Someone mentioned to me the other day the importance of feedback and being nice as opposed to being kind on your feedback. A lot of people, and I suppose you need to be brave as a leader to do this, or at least rip the plaster off and do it the first time, and then it'll go. A lot of people gloss over giving Trenton the real feedback as to what's happened because you don't want to upset somebody's feelings, but actually you're not helping them there.
You're being unkind.
Yeah, if you want to be kind and help them and develop them, you need to give them that correct feedback, and so that they can develop as individuals.
It's 100%. It is unkind not to give someone constructive feedback so that they've got the opportunity to learn and grow and develop themselves. So there's been a bit of research around motivation around feedback. So the ideal praise to criticism ratio is about 5-1. So you should be very, very regularly noticing what people in your team do and providing them with specific feedback, positive feedback about the effort and the input. So there's a few things I just want to unpick that. You have to be specific. It's meaningless if you say, hey, good job this week. Well, good job with what? Have you even any idea what I've been doing? So it's got to be very specific. You've got to notice what they've been doing. And you should ideally be praising the inputs and the efforts and not just what got achieved. It's far more motivating for us. The reason being is that whatever you've achieved as a result of doing that work, you don't focus on the achievement. You think about, the effort you put in and the emotions you went through and the barriers you had to overcome. That's what you remember about a certain thing you might have done. So being told, well done for the effort you put in. I know you were working till 9 o'clock most nights. And I know you had to kind of liaise with this really tricky stakeholder and get that information from them. And I know that you had to overcome this and this hurdle. And I know you find this thing difficult, but you still cracked on with it. I'm really impressed. All of those things you've done, like really, and I mean this, well done. So you got to get into a habit of doing this really positive feedback that is meaningful, and you have to take the time to notice it. So you've got to put the time and effort into this. It doesn't come easy. But once you do that, you're then creating a lot more space for you to give that constructive feedback. And like you're saying, the difference between being nice and being kind, I agree. It is unkind not to give someone constructive feedback because they can't grow. And you know what? If they feel like they're not growing in your business, then they're more likely, all other things being equal, they are more likely to leave and go somewhere else where they feel they can learn. So you're in some ways giving them that feedback is actually kind of motivating, as long as the ratio is roughly that 5-1, that 5 positive bits of praise for the one, here's something I'd like you to do better. What do you think?
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, because it is quite easy to roll off the tongue. Well done today. Great week this week. But like you said, it's meaningless, isn't it?
Yeah,
and I think
completely meaningless.
I suppose by noticing specifics that the individual has done, like you mentioned and gave examples of, it actually shows that you care, and you are taking an interest in that person. So there's more of a buy. There becomes more of a buy in there, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%. It ties back to the purpose thing you were talking about. You can just be cracking on with your job and you'd be like, is anyone even noticing?
Yeah.
And if your boss is like, every week, right, I saw you did this, this, and this, like, wow, really impressed. Then it's like, okay, there is a purpose to this. Someone is noticing.
Yeah. It gives you a bit of a fulfillment, I suppose. And also I think on the feedback front, I think was it King Scott on the Radical Candor who said, well, you need to care deeply in order to give, to give constructive feedback. Otherwise it doesn't mean anything, or it comes across as criticism.
Yep, 100%. You've got to care about them as an individual. Help and understand what motivates them, what drives them, where they're potentially trying to get to, and they've got to feel like you're supporting them in that. And any constructive feedback you give, if you align it around those things, they're going to really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Trenton, thank you for your time today. Huge amounts of information there in the last nearly 50 minutes. So one thing I wanted to ask you before we go, a lot of experience. You've got wealth of experience setting up and running and then selling, exiting your own business and the coaching that you do. What's the most important trait as a leader?
I mean, the most important trait, I would say, not just leader, it's in everyone, self-awareness.
Yeah, perfect.
Like I talked about before, you got to understand what motivates you, what drives you, what your core values are, what your strengths are. Because if you know all of that, you can be quite intentional with the way that you lead.
Perfect. Rounds it off nicely. Trenton, thank you very, very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining me. It's been perfect.
Thanks for having me. Cheers, Adrian.